Hello, everyone, and welcome to this RTCA Incorporated webinar, GNSS Jamming and Spoofing, Building Resistance. I'm Alexander Para, Senior Program Director at RTCA, and your moderator for this event. It's an honor to welcome you to our first RTCA webinar of 2025. Now, let's get started. We have a diverse panel of experts that include Dr. Chris Haggerty, Ms. Ellen McGoy, Dr. Wes Olson, and Mr. Yasuo Ishihara, all who will provide valuable technical expertise in GPS spoofing and jamming through their professional experience and their insight from working on the development of RTCA standards. Now, if you're interested in viewing this webinar later or learning more about other topics previously hosted on an RTCA webinar, make sure to check out our YouTube channel. You'll find an abundance of other content related to aviation and aviation standards located there. Also, we could not do this work without the support of our sponsors. We would like to thank our sponsors Collins Aerospace, General Aviation Manufacturers Association, L3 Harris, and Spirit. They make this webinar possible. We have messages from two of our sponsors today, L3 Harris and Spirit, featuring Jeremy Bennington, VP of P&T Strategy and Innovation. Let's roll the video.
I'd like to welcome everyone to this RTCA webinar on GNSS jamming and spoofing. For decades, our industry has been developing solutions to improve GNSS, even when it's under attack by an adversary. And while we all knew these attacks could become sophisticated and impact civil users, most investment for resiliency was done in the defense industry. Spirent developed systems to monitor GNSS globally and test jamming and spoofing, and like all of you, we were alarmed to see the rise of GNSS interference and subsequent impact on civil users, especially aviation. But we are now at a crossroads. There needs to be greater investment into the testing, development, and deployment of resilient GNSS. We need to standardize test methods to ensure that civil users of GNSS that are under attack can reliably purchase and use those systems. And we can't stop there. We must enhance existing GNSS constellation and consider new approaches like low Earth orbit satellites, leveraging communication signals, improving sensors, visual navigation, quantum, and many other innovative P&T solutions to help our users better navigate. Spirent, soon to be Keysight, has over 40 years of continuous innovation in P&T. We are pushing the boundaries from greater realism in test, decomposition of recorded signals to understand the signals and create new test scenarios, virtualized cloud-based services for testing, embedded solutions, and of course, artificial intelligence and machine learning to help scale testing and enhance what we can learn from it. We are excited to support today's webinar and are ready to support you. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, to begin this webinar, I would like to begin with Dr. Chris Haggerty, Co-Chair of Special Committee 159 and Chair of the Program Management Committee. Chris, great to see you. To start us off, could you introduce yourself and what your Special Committee 159 works to develop for global navigation systems?
Pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me. If we could have the first chart, please. Our committee has been around for a long time. It was established in 1985, back when there were only 7 operational GPS satellites, 10 years before the system was actually declared fully operational. And for many years, our focus was on developing the standards for the type of GNSS avionics that are on most aircraft today, which are L1 only, single frequency at 1575 megahertz, and only using GPS among the other core constellations that exist today for GNSS, along with augmentations that have been internationally standardized. Today, our work is largely focused on a new generation of avionics that is embracing dual frequency and multi-constellations. And most of our work today is done jointly with EUROCAE, specifically their Working Group 62. We have a very good leadership team. In addition to myself and George Ligler as co-chairs, we have a government authorized representative, Hamza Abdulsalam from FAA, Captain Wes Googe of American as our secretary, Rebecca Morrison of RTCA as our program director, John Stedeni and Mikhail Mabalo our chairs of our SBAS working group, Joel Wickers and Matt Harris are chairs of our GBAS working group, and Sai Kalyadaraman of Collins, chairs our interference and antennas group. Next, please. This webinar is on jamming and spoofing, and just some layman's definitions here. Both of these are forms of electromagnetic interference. We refer to it as jamming for emissions that can disrupt GNSS equipment on aircraft, but does not look like GNSS signals. And spoofing is a term we'll give for emissions that do actually emulate GNSS signals. They can be acquired and tracked by the avionics, causing false positions and all kinds of other mayhem. We have been tasked with addressing the threats of jamming and spoofing for a long time now. Since for 10 years ago now, we had added to our terms of reference that all of our new standards from that point on should address to the extent practicable these emerging threats. Next, please. Certainly a motivator for this webinar has been the fact that these threats that were very rare back in 2015 when we first had this added to our scope of our special committee, these are daily events now, particularly in many parts of the world, in Europe, in Asia, and elsewhere. These are just a few of the alerts that have been put forth by regulators, FAA and EASA. Have both issued safety alerts to operators and other airspace users. And then recently, 3 specialized agencies of the United Nations that are very important to aviation, the International Telecommunication Union, International Civil Aviation Organization, and International Maritime Organization have all issued a joint statement noting the great growth and the emergence of these threats and the needs to mitigate them to the extent necessary for maintaining safety. Next, please. Just a quick introduction to some of the activities of SC-159 relevant to jamming and spoofing. We do have a standard that's out there now for GNSS-aided inertial systems. It was published in December of 2020 that is covered by an FAA technical standard order, TSOC 220. And this was our first standard that was actually developed after this mandate was put in our terms of reference to address jamming and spoofing threats. This standard does include requirements for detecting spoofing jumps, ramps, or other forms of spoofing on the GNSS position output by comparison with the inertial navigation outputs. They're hard to find in these standards. Back in those days, we were a little less hesitant to talk openly about these threats. But if you look at those standards and look at the appendix that's labeled alternate trajectories, you'll find, if you dig into it, that this is all about detecting spoofing. We are now focused, as mentioned earlier, on dual frequency multi-constellation avionics. We have done one drop of a minimum operational performance standard with EUROCAE on this topic that was published with an errata in last January. This standard does include ramped up requirements on detecting spoofing, as well as mitigating the threats of jamming to some extent. The first version that's been published thus far is not intended to be certified, but the next version is intended to be addressed by both an FAA TSO and a European Aviation Safety Authorities ETSO. The spoofing content within this document for the next drop is being extensively revamped by a special ad hoc working group that we've established under Working Group 2 in SC 159, led by Dr. John Stedini. We've had a lot of participants in SC 159 express an interest in developing standards for adaptive antennas for GNSS, what we refer to as SERPAs for controlled reception pattern antennas. URK has actually already established a new working group 133 to start working on standards in this area. Within RTCA, we hope to join, but we are awaiting the removal of SERPA technology from the U.S. munitions list within the U.S. laws covering export controls on dual-use technologies, ITAR. We expect the SERPAs used for GNSS to be removed from ITAR in September, and then we'll start this new activity. So just again, a quick overview of some of the things we're doing relevant to this topic, and with those opening remarks, back over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Chris. Small little follow-up for you. How would you say that the standards from Special Committee 159 address spoofing and jamming today? And what are they working on for the future?
In terms of what we've done today, we do have two standards that do include the requirements to be able to detect spoofing on the aircraft. The FAA, as a very important regulator within our committee, has thus far expressed the opinion that it's a lot more important to detect the presence of spoofing than it is to mitigate it at the moment, because aircraft do have a lot of other navigation systems that can be used just so long as the flight deck is aware that the GNSS output is potentially erroneous. So these two standards that are listed on this chart do address those, and in the future, again, we are planning on a major rewrite of DO 401, this dual frequency multi-constellation avionics MOPS, to much more rigorously address the threats of spoofing. There's not a lot that we can do until this SERPA activity begins to address mitigating jamming. One of the most powerful techniques to actually suppress jamming starts with the antenna. So we're looking forward very much to an interim final rule published by the Department of State to remove GNSS SERPAs from ITAR to come to fruition in September, and start on that activity with URK to start developing what should be a very powerful means to mitigate the threat of jamming. So those are the main activities we have underway in response to your question.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And it's nice to learn a little bit more about the antenna portion of it. I didn't actually know about that, so thank you. Okay, so now moving on, wanted to talk a little bit more about what happens when other technologies lose their GNSS information due to spoofing or jamming. Our next panel member is Ms. Ellen McGoy, Chair of Special Committee 227, which publishes standards about required navigation performance.
Hi, Alex, and the rest of you. Thanks for the opportunity to represent my committee here in this forum about how the industry is responding to the spoofing and jamming. My committee, and like my colleague Chris, it's joint with Europe, Working Group 83 in Europe, and some other leaders on the committee are Eric Ringwest from Honeywell, Wes Gujigan from American Airlines, and a government representative, Barry Miller from the FAA. We work on the standards for what's called required navigation performance, and that's basically the accuracy and alerting to keep the airplane centered in that highway in the sky. And we talk about that in terms of miles. And over the ocean, that would be a 4 mile. En route over the continent, 2 miles. And when you get close to the airports, 1 mile, and up to 0.3 miles for approach. We do this with what's called a flight management system, the FMS, which if you have a GPS in your car, it's basically the same thing. You type in the route, and the FMS tells you when to turn and what time you're going to get there. The same thing is on your smartphone. The FMS is probably the most visible victim of spoofing and jamming. The problem with spoofing is if the GPS is spoofed to the wrong position, the FMS will turn in the wrong direction. Similarly, if the GPS is actually jammed, the FMS will be uncertain about its position, and then there's a risk it will turn in the wrong direction. The RNP standards, again, for how accurate and when you alert to make sure you're really on this highway, today all require GPS. And so that's where the vulnerabilities come in. Some systems do have backups, but today you're seeing in the news how that plays out.
Would it be possible to go into a little bit more detail on how RNP would respond when GNSS is lost completely?
Right, and we're working on strengthening that. Today, although GPS is required to stay on that highway in the sky, there are 3 problems with that you're seeing. One is in the news. If there is a backup, it's not working out for us. Some systems don't even have a backup. And then even if you do have a backup, it may not have been designed or approved in a way that you can use it the same as GPS. So the standards published to date require using GPS, and we just kicked off another update cycle where we want to, I like the word Chris used, but have a more robust ability to switch to that backup. One, to actually require a backup. If you're the flying public, don't worry. If you bought a ticket to Chicago, Minneapolis, Dallas, don't want to leave any airlines out, your aircraft likely has a backup. We just want to make it better. And so we want to require that backup or have classes of equipment that have a backup, and then have more robust requirements for cross-checking those backups and have a more seamless automatic transition to the backup. The most urgent thing, though, is we want to, our committee is going to be focusing on what's already on the aircraft or already available to the aircraft. So we're looking at having more robust requirements for DME. The DME radios, a little bit like GPS on the ground, but it doesn't move, or the inertial system, because we think those are the things that would provide the most rapid response without limiting new technologies or limiting the manufacturers to be able to innovate.
I really appreciate your follow-up. So we're talking about multi-sensor, some DME integration. Is the NDB going to get killed? Are we going to use that, or?
We don't use NDB today in the position solution, but you bring a great point. The FMS is not the only navigation. If worst comes to worst, there's still a minimum network there where the ground stations are there, an ILS for approach. There's going to be a VOR MON to help you navigate if you need to a terminal area, and there'll be some NDBs around. I know Canada likes to use them up north.
Thanks so much, Ellen. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on. Next is Dr. Wes Olson, longtime member of RTCA Special Committee 147 and leads the MIT Lincoln Laboratory Group. Good afternoon, Dr. Olson, and thanks so much for being a part of this webinar today.
Glad to join you, Alex. Thank you very much, and appreciate you inviting me.
Glad to have you. So you've been working on developing a variety of different aviation systems. What does GNSS loss affect other aviation systems that you've been working on?
Sure. So I'm representing Special Committee 147 today. We've been in existence since 1980, working initially on TCAS, the Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System. I'm here today actually on behalf of Hui Brandow from Honeywell, who is the co-chair, along with Stu Seawright from the FAA and Matt Haskin also from the FAA. We are joint with EuroK, Working Group 75. And originally TCAS was developed before GPS was operational, and also before ADS-B was even considered. We worked on that here at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, but TCAS was developed before that. So TCAS, and I like to discriminate now between a collision avoidance system, which not only provides information to the flight crew on where the other aircraft are, but also provides alerts, a caution level alert, to alert the flight crew to visually acquire the aircraft or prepare to maneuver, and then directive guidance, i.e. what to do to avoid a potential collision by climbing or descending, or for newer systems, turning left and turning right. This is for commercial aviation typically, although we're expanding that to rotorcraft as well as large and small UAS and some of our advanced work with ACAS-X. But there are a number of traffic advisory systems that are on general aviation aircraft. And these primarily use ADS-B, and they are very vulnerable, but they're not certified systems. They're not in the purview of this committee, and they don't provide that directive guidance. So we work on TCAS, which uses relative information, uses interrogations of the other aircraft's transponder and listens for the replies, calculates range and range rate. It's completely independent of any knowledge of ownership, geodetic location, or quite frankly, the geodetic location of the other aircraft. So it is completely invulnerable, really, to GNSS spoofing, that loss of aircraft position, or false positions on the part of other aircraft or ownership, or jamming. There is a variant of TCAS that we developed in this committee that's called hybrid surveillance. The spectrum is very congested. The collision avoidance systems use the same spectrum as the air traffic control radars, 1030 and 1090 megahertz. So in order to reduce that spectrum congestion, advanced versions of TCAS can use ADS-B information, but only to reduce interrogation. So when an intruder or another aircraft is further away, it's interrogated less often, but that ADS-B is validated. And as the aircraft approaches, it transitions to that active interrogation entirely. So that relative information is maintained. Now, we all also in our committee, we produced or are producing standards for the next generation of collision avoidance. It's called ACAS-X. It uses machine learning, integrates a number of different surveillance sources, including ADS-B, to reduce the number of alerts using that machine learning. It reduces alerting by about 65%, increases safety by about 20%. And so ACAS-XA does use, that's the replacement for TCAS. It uses ADS-B information, but requirements from the FAA in conjunction with DHS, when we were developing the system, beginning about 2013 in SC 147, even then there was recognition that spoofing and jamming could be an issue. So we're required to validate that ADS-B information. So to compare the active interrogation reply to ADS-B, and the ADS-B information is not used if it fails validation. So that would protect from either inaccurate ownership location or inaccurate position broadcasts by the other aircraft. There may be some effect on the traffic display, but those caution level and warning level alerts should not be affected. And it's essentially the same for the other variants of ACAS-X, although for the UAS, they might use an airborne radar, for example, to do that validation. Or for small UAS or drones, they might use some external signals. The only interaction that we in the committee see in the event of GNSS spoofing, and I know you'll be talking to Yasuo next, is in the train avoidance area, where if it would generate an inaccurate train avoidance alert, that can turn TCAS or ACAS-X into traffic alert only and disable those warning level alerts. But that's a brief summary, Alex.
I appreciate it. No, that was great. Drones are kind of up and coming, still getting built with momentum. Is there anything else you could talk about for drones or maybe for their integration?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So ACAS-SXU, which is in DO 396, is intended for high critical small UAS or drones who are not equipped with a transponder. They are very dependent on GNSS, both for their own ship location as well as using ADS-B to locate the position of other nearby aircraft. And so there are all vulnerabilities there. There are provisions for validation. It's likely to be either from an onboard source like EOIR or for attacks externally. If you have a ground network, you could validate. But there are also concerns about the security of the link itself. So ADS-B, and this is outside the scope of GNSS spoofing and jamming, is vulnerable. It contains relatively few, if any, security provisions. So the committee is considering and has built into ACAS-SXU for the drone market the ability to take an advanced, more robust ADS-B link that would incorporate authentication, maybe some other type of modern security features that would make it more robust to intrusions, not just from spoofing and jamming, but other intrusions on kind of a network surveillance solution.
It's very interesting. I truly appreciate your response. That was great. Thanks so much, Wes. Next is Mr. Yasuo Ishihara, co-chair of Special Committee 231, Terrain Awareness Warning Systems, or TAWS. Good afternoon, Mr. Ishikawa. RTCA appreciates your participation today on this really interesting topic.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever everyone happens to be. I'm Yasuo Ishihara, a Senior Technical Fellow with Honeywell Aerospace and a co-chair of SC231, along with a co-chair, Rick Rednar from ACSS. And the SC231 is a special committee to discuss terrain awareness warning system and minimum operating standards. Next slide, please. So TAWS is a terrain awareness and warning system. This is a newer version of what used to be called GPWS, or Ground Proximity Warning System, which is to address alerting the flight crew when an aircraft inadvertently fly towards mountain or water or man-made obstacles. When the GPWS became TAWS, what made the difference was the introduction of terrain, obstacle, and runway databases are now made available on the system with accurate aircraft 3D position, or the GNSS or GPS position. And this allowed the system to be able to provide much longer alerting time when compared to the previous GPWS. Now, I need to talk a little bit about history of why we are using GNSS position as the primary source in TAWS versus other positions such as Flight Management System, FMS. This goes back 20 some years ago when TAWS was first introduced. There are many countries where the coordinate system or the map reference system, so like a latitude and longitude, how they are measured and published. Each country had their own reference system that did not necessarily align with everybody else. So in some far extreme cases, like a Far East, in a country like Japan, the difference between Japanese local coordinate system and what the US uses, which is basically very close to what the GPS or GNSS provides in WGS84 system, could be as much as like half a nautical miles. For the TAWS to work, as I'm showing here, it has a terrain and man-made obstacle database, which is mapped and registered in this GNSS WGS84 coordinates. When the aircraft position is using a completely different coordinate system, now we are introducing a position shift or map shift. And that could be misleading, or sometimes that could cause nuisance alerts, or that could cause a miss of an alert. So at that time, in some countries of operations, pilots were even asked to deselect GPS from FMS position source selection, such that FMS could rely on a ground navigation system, which is in their local coordinate system, so that on a display, on a navigation map, everything aligned. But that's not a case for TAWS. The TAWS needs to have the aircraft position as accurate as possible in the same reference system, WGS84. So that is the history of why TAWS primarily rely on GPS and not from the FMS position source. Now, at that time, the GPS was one of the most accurate 3D position providers, and then we trusted that. And 20 some years go by, and we are now in the position where the GPS position could be spoofed. and the TOS system may or may not even actually realize what's going on. So that's the issue that we are trying to address. And next page, please. This has already been discussed earlier, but just to recap, there are two phases, jamming and spoofing. So in general, jamming is basically somebody is overpowering a genuine GPS signals. So you basically block the signal. And most obvious symptom of this is that the GPS data goes away, or the parameters goes invalid. For the consumer of the position data like TOS, this one is somewhat easy to handle because the signal goes away or goes not available. So the system can handle a lack of GPS position if the aircraft has alternate position sources like FMS or IRS. The spoofing is the one that is causing a problem because often the GPS sensors will tell TOS, everything look okay, look accurate, trust me, kind of status. So because of the reason that I described earlier, the TOS relies mostly on GNSS position data as long as GNSS sensor is telling us that they are accurate. So if you could go to the next slide. So the committee got together and went through some of the data that we have seen in the industry, the partnership with operators. There could be many ways for GNSS to be jammed and spoofed. And there could be the patterns we are seeing today may not be for the future. But for the current situation, in almost all cases, if you start out with a good GNSS position sensing, and at some point during the flight, and it could be during initial climb or during cruise or approach, or it could sometimes be at the airport on the ground. But anyway, let's, in this example, supposedly start with GPS performing okay in normal status. And the TOS is happily taking that information. Then it usually, based on the data that we have seen, starts with getting into the phase of jamming. And the duration of the jamming it varies based on the scenarios. But at least it goes through some phase of jamming state. And in this scenario, during jamming, as I said, usually the GPS information or the parameters go invalid, or the GPS itself recognizes the degraded performance or accuracy, so that all of that status is passed on to TOS, so that we can use that information accordingly. And the TOS can, and then a lot of manufacturers' TOS is already be able to handle either deselecting the GPS from the position source or alter their algorithm to be able to handle inaccurate or not as accurate GPS position information. Then followed by spoofing. And in this phase, who knows what the GPS is telling us? The GNSS receiver will usually indicate the estimated position accuracy is very high, and it's not seeing any anomalies. The only thing it's different is that now the value is erroneous. Now, in the data that we have seen, usually we could see sometime between the normal and the spoofing through jamming. By the time it gets to spoofing, the position data being reported by the GNSS is essentially at completely different location. Sometimes they could jump for hundreds of miles and then 1,000 feet of altitude. So it's more of a step jump from what used to be good to somewhere else. The committee member in the data that we went through did not see any events where the GNS position was smoothly slewed from the actual position to completely somewhere else without going through just jamming or step. So based on that observation, if you could go to the next slide. What we have discussed and suggest for the tools manufacturers is the system can monitor some of unusual steps or the movement of GPS or GNSS position data, such as unreasonable position jump or altitude jump or ground speed jumps or true track jumps. Some anomalies or jumps that the moving aircraft cannot physically achieve, type of step jump, could be one signature for TORS to be able to detect the GPS spoofing. Other thing that the committee noticed was that the GPS provides time, and then that time can sometimes go backward or in the future, and that could be another signature. Now, if the aircraft has another position sensor, such as IRS or FMS, they could be used to kind of check the boundary of reasonableness as well. Now, if all these fails, the committee also discussed a possibility of allowing TORS to have either manual or automatic way to alter the position sourcing, such as deselecting GNS by pilot or by the system automatically. And at the end, the committee have reached out to operators, and the operators who has been routinely encountering spoofing, thus experiencing false TORS alerts, they indicated that they prefer to have reduction of false alerts over the availability of the TORS system. And that's what we have from SC231. Alex.
Thanks, Yasuo. I really appreciate that one. Now, is there something that could be standardized, that could be improved to improve the performance of the TOS function and integration, maybe?
Yes, that has been on the discussion point. And in the future, the SC231 will most likely go back and open up DO documents and possibly add some requirements or recommendations to the MOPS. But at this point, the SC231 is not going to open MOPS document to add any of this topic yet.
Thank you, Yasuo. Well, in preparation for the Q&A coming up, I'd like to invite all panelists to join me on screen and those attending virtually to post your questions to the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Okay, well, if I could bring it back to Chris for a minute. How do RTCA Incorporated committees know when a specific technology should be highlighted for standardization rather than it being left up to manufacturer discretion?
Yeah, great question, Alex. The RTCA is a member organization, and we hear about new technologies and interest in developing new standards from our members. So there is a process that you can find on the RTCA website that provides guidance on establishing new committees. But essentially, an advocate for the new technology would need to bring forward information about it to RTCA. This, if it's viewed to have merit by RTCA staff, would be presented to the Program Management Committee, and then ultimately a decision would be made on establishing a committee, including the scope in terms of reference. In general, we want the technology to be of interest to multiple vendors and users, and not just a single entity. There are RTCA rules and provisions for intellectual property to make sure that our standards aren't essentially a financial windfall for one organization rather than a benefit to the overall community. So those are just some of the, I guess, the steps and some of the things that are taken into consideration.
Thanks, Chris. Ellen, are there any systems that are capable today against GNSS jamming and spoofing?
Absolutely. A lot of systems already have backups, but they may not have been approved in a way that you could use it like you would use GPS. And that's what we're starting to look at is come up with better standards that you could, use it down to potentially an RMP 0.3 miles. Good enough for approach at some locations without the precision accuracy you get if you're flying a ILS lookalike with LPV.
Do you know of the steps that are in place to approve these systems for use?
Right. RTCA is an important player in making that happen. If I were to do like Chris was alluding to, come up with my own technology and do something special, that's a huge risk for my company, and it's a lot of demand on the FAA. It's not efficient for anyone. I could show up with what I think is a diamond and they'd say, nope, that's a rock. RTCA is excellent in that the members, they are competitors, FMS manufacturers, airframe manufacturers, airlines, pilots, air traffic controllers. We can come together and agree with our collective knowledge what the minimum standard should be. Then we know that if we come forward with something, we know what it takes to get it approved. And it reduces workload on the FMS to know what can be approved. There's a level playing field, while still giving us room to innovate and do better than the minimum.
Thank you. Now, Wes, I think you spoke earlier about the ADSB, like a link in the works. Could you speak more about that potentially?
Sure. So the community, the FAA, MITRE, Lincoln Laboratory, and others are exploring aircraft anything A to X as a link. Now, clearly, this is a long-term solution as it involves spectrum, which has a very long-term prospect. But there is the recognition that as we network small UAS drones, if you will, as well as urban air mobility, there's going to be a need for a more secure link. And so that work is in progress. To address, I did see one of the questions in the chat about spoofing ADSB, which is certainly possible. It's an open standard with the right antenna, the right software-defined radio, or whatever you use. You could spoof ADSB. There are techniques. They could certainly be standardized, but it's a concern, and privacy is another concern. But the community is thinking about that. But I would just caution everybody, it is a long-term solution, which makes it important to work on now, but not to rely on in the next 10 years, because it will take spectrum authorization in a number of.
Thanks. Okay. I think we're ready to do some Q&A. So really quick, let me look at some of these. One of the ones that I have here is for regard to what Mr. Ishihara spoke of. And the question is, he seemed to imply that FMS navigation is different from IRS and GPS navigation. How so?
Sure. So basically, the GPS and IRS are inputs to FMS along with the radio navigation sensing, and just the multiple ways for FMS to be able to compute. So the FMS uses GPS, IRS, and now radio updates to basically have their own solution computed.
Thank you. Trying to scroll through a couple of these other ones here. So I have one on equipment. So the question is, depending on the type of aircraft that you fly, older generation aircraft such as Airbus 330, 320, is it even possible to fit new generations of protective equipment on older jet types? Would someone feel comfortable with that one?
Well, I can address that one from the TORS equipment perspective. the TOS is essentially talking to other members of the special committee, avionics manufacturers, will mostly be just an algorithmic change in the software. So it doesn't really require anything new in a way.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to comment also. We like to joke in our committee that it's back to the future. Aircraft were flying with inertial systems and DME before GPS was invented. But the advantage today now is we can layer the system. GPS will continue for quite a while to be the most accurate high integrity sensor available to the aircraft, but we want to add layers of DME. It's appealing because it's a different frequency, so it's not jammed with the same signals that would jam the GPS. So that gives it diversity. And then finally, the IRS provides a further one where it's contained within the aircraft. It can't be jammed, and that provides a last layer of protection. And the RMP equipment is what we like to say multi-sensor. It is, in fact, bringing all those together to use for its own navigation to make sure your airplane turns the right way, and it's available to the other sensors according to their ability to use it.
Thanks. Okay, I think I have one for Chris. Jamming spoofing solutions seem to be dependent on your point of view, i.e. GPS receiver, FMS inertial. It appears that the best solution for all the systems to work together, but RTCA is organized by product. Any thought on this problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really, the best solution really is to leverage everything that's available on a modern aircraft. And you're right, we are set up really stovepiped a little bit into to work on boxes that they can be TSO'd or ETSO'd. For jamming and spoofing, I do think that we do need a lot of communication amongst the committees we have present here and even others. Some of the studies just looking at things that GPS touched found at least, I think, 4 dozen functions on an modern aircraft that can be impacted by GNSS. So I do think we have to work together to partition amongst the boxes on the aircraft, but also to look at system-wide solutions. So I'm not sure how we're going to do that within RTCA and EUROCAE and other standards body, but I do think that's going to be an essential part of the solution. And just, I guess, to give one example, a couple of people have noted about inertial in the Q&A, but it is a huge problem in that inertial can be used to cross-check GNSS to look for spoofing events, but also GNSS is typically used to calibrate the inertial, so you can end up corrupting that independent sensor that you want to cross-check against if you're not careful. And it's profoundly hard to do that for a very sophisticated spoofer that, for instance, is pulling your position off very, very slowly with kind of an error growth that's beyond the ability of the stability of the inertial sensors.
Thanks, Chris. I think this one I'll send this to Wes, see what you think. One of the commenters said, couldn't signals from GNSS be combined with some kind of encoded verification signal to authenticate them? Spoofing and jamming signals would not be authenticated. So spoofing and jamming signals would not be authenticated.
I suspect that I am not the one to answer this question. I think,
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take a crack at that. So the
Please.
European core constellation Galileo, which is embraced by our DO 401 standard, they actually are already have implemented authentication, adding cryptographic features to the message on one of their frequencies at 1575 megahertz. And in our next revision of the dual frequency multi-constellation MOPS, we are planning to add provisions to use this open service navigation message authentication feature, OSNMA, they call it. We should note, I guess, that it doesn't protect against all threats. There are certain spoofing threats where they just repeat the signal rather than generate it anew, which can defeat some of the cryptographic features. If you just have a digital playback, for instance, you'll have all the cryptography correct. It's just going to be time delayed that can still cause problems. And right now, GPS is actually exploring a technique they call Chimera that actually encrypts some of the spreading code chips within GNSS signals to be able to detect range-induced errors like that from GNSS spoofing. This will be tested out on navigation technology satellite number 3 that we hope will be launched sometime soon. They're waiting on a launch vehicle to put that satellite up. And some of those technologies, if successful, may be implemented on the GPS-3 follow-on satellites in the future. So cryptography will definitely play a role, and a lot of GNSS providers are starting to field certain cryptographic features beyond the military, which of course has already done that for years using private key encryption of their signals that are broadcast from GNSS satellites for military use.
Thanks, Chris. How about as jamming and spoofing devices tools become more sophisticated and much more attainable, will GPS ever be considered completely trusted?
I can take that one again, but no. I think the rules go back to the Prudent Navigator from some of the very old maritime navigation texts, that the prudent navigator never relies on one source of navigation. Some of these cryptographic techniques may in the future make it very difficult to spoof, but still, if the aircraft has other sensors, it's always advisable to pay attention to other information that you have available to you.
So I have a question about TCAS and GNSS spoofing. Is there a scenario where GPS, GNSS spoofing affecting aircraft number 1 can manifest as a false TCAS traffic or resolution advisory on both aircraft 1 and aircraft 2?
So my answer was, I don't see how that would be possible. As I mentioned on legacy TCAS, there is no reliance. There's no interface for ADS-B, and it's completely independent, both of ownership position and the reported position on ADS-B of the other aircraft. It's a relative system that relies on interrogation and response. For the more modern systems like ACAS-X, it does require validation, and the validation criteria is around 1,000 feet in range, so that's extremely unlikely. I would say an additional mitigation, if that were to happen, and the committee, of course, would be very interested in any false TA or RA reports because they should not happen. TCAS always sends a coordination message, and the 2 aircraft would coordinate their maneuvers. So I think that risk is minimal and it should not occur. But once again, as with all the committees, I'm sure if there are new reports of problems from the community, the committees will be very interested in hearing about them so we can mitigate or assess those risks.
Thank you. I think this might be an interesting one as our final one from Q&A. Is there any initiative to handle GNSS spoofing in the context of Special Committee 216, cybersecurity, or in cooperation with it? Maybe not yet.
Well, I would have one comment, just maybe not where it belongs, but getting it to belong. It's been difficult in the past before recent events. In our committee, I can't speak for the other committees, to get any information on potential security threats such as spoofing and jamming. Because RTCA is an open committee, and we do collaborate with European partners. I know there's some discussion about ITAR. So it's a limited ability to share specific information on threats to the committee as a whole, and that is a challenge, I think, even within the FAA, sharing that information. So I think that's an area, whether it's in a Special Committee 216, what is the process for feeding information which may be sensitive or even classified to the committee so they can accurately assess and mitigate the risks. But I would defer maybe to Chris on that since you're in the PMC.
Yeah, in terms of 216, there has been an implication actually in all of our special committees, which is that our new MOPS template does include a section on information security that's made its way into some of our GNSS standards. But this is more on protecting the flow of the data from the GNSS receiver on the aircraft and the network, and making sure that if you're updating firmware or whatnot, that you make sure you don't introduce any viruses or those sorts of things. So there is some tie from 216, but they have focused largely on, again, on aircraft networking sort of stuff in their scope. We actually specifically excluded some FAA-provided services like augmentations to GNSS and GNSS just when the committee was established.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for participating today with our GNSS jamming and spoofing webinar. Thank you to the panel. So to everyone at home, make sure to join us later this summer and fall for an operational perspective on GNSS jamming and spoofing from the flight deck and other aviation systems. You can find this webinar on RTCA's YouTube channel later on this week. And once again, to our sponsors, we would like to thank Collins Aerospace, General Aviation Manufacturers Association, L3Harris, Spirit for making this webinar possible today. At the conclusion of this webinar, you'll see a survey and we'll ask what your thoughts on the topic and any other topics you'd like us to address. For more information on upcoming training courses, events, please visit our website, rtca.org. Finally, thanks to all of you for tuning in to keep situational awareness on what's in development within the aviation standards industry. RTCA Incorporated, safer skies through collaboration. Thank you.